Hello, students. Today we are going to talk about plotting your story. And remember, a few days ago, I told you that fiction writers don't just choose a story idea and go straight to writing a draft. Instead, they use strategies for bringing characters to life, such as imagining their characters in everyday scenes, and considering the internal and external traits of the characters and the protagonists. Writers go through their lives thinking, what would my character do in this situation? They give special attention to what motivates a character and the obstacles that get in the character's way. Writers postpone thinking about the details of what happens in a story, about the plot of a story, until they've done this other work, which you guys have done. Um, they postpone the thinking of the sequence of events because eventually they take all that they know about their characters, especially their understandings of their characters' motivations and obstacles, and they use this information to create a plan for their stories. Today, I want to teach you that after writers develop their characters, they draft possible plots for their stories. Fiction writers plan by plotting the arc of a story and specifically by aiming to intensify the problem. They do this by using what they know about plotting and choosing from a variety of tools to help them plan. If you haven't already written the notes for today in your notebook, please pause the video and write today's notes. Our goal being, after writers develop their characters, they draft possible plots for their stories, and then some tips on how to plot your story. Many famous writers rely on story arcs to think through the plots of their stories. And of course, there isn't just one way a story can go. Kurt Vonnegut once laid out 5 common story arcs that follow. One, for example, he calls man in whole. And he described it in this way. You will see the story over and over again. People love it, and it's not copyrighted. The story is man in hole, but the story needn't be about a man in a hole. It's this: somebody gets into trouble and gets it out of it again. It's not accidental that the line ends up higher than where it began. This is encouraging to readers. What is the line? Just wait. It's not accidental that the line ends up higher than where it began. That's when talking about the plot line. So, for example, here's another plot line that from the story we just read, 13 and a half. Another plot line that might be familiar to you is this. See if you can guess the story. The arc begins way down here with a truly despondent girl whose mother died and whose dad remarried a horrible woman with 2 horrible daughters who treat this girl like a servant. Things are about as bad as they can get for this girl. And then there's an invitation to a party, and everyone gets to go except the narrator. But then a fairy godmother appears, and she sends the narrator to the party. Things shoot way up from here. As you probably guessed, it's Cinderella. She attracts the prince's attention, and of course, she leaves the party, drops her shoe, and goes back to being rotten for her. Things go back to being rotten for her, except they aren't as bad as they used to be, because Cinderella now has memories of a perfect evening. And when the prince locates the girl, things spiral to infinite amounts of happiness for Cinderella. So that plot line goes up and finishes with just a little downturn. Now, story arcs can help figure out the rise and fall of your own plot because they remind you it's not just one event after another in your story. That would be a very boring story. It needs to climb. The excitement to the activities need to grow in excitement. So it's like each scene in the arc is a whole new movement for your character. That's what makes readers want to keep reading your story, to find out how the character will get to the other side of this arc. The story arc also shows you that something is going to happen and things are going to get tough. You should have a problem in your story. Then something happens as the story curves or arcs that changes things or that solves your problem. After that, things change, your character is different, and there isn't a feeling or anticipation anymore. Most of you have taken drama already where you write skits. You have to have a problem and a solution in each of your skit. Same with your stories for this unit. Writers, earlier this year in the reading workshop, we discussed how stories usually go, that usually the main character, he wants something and something gets in the way of what he wants. The character encounters trouble or a problem. Today we learned that usually after encountering the problem, the character has to deal with the problem somehow. Hence the story arc. You may recall, well, you should have read the story 13 and a half or heard me read it to you. We talked about how the story went, how the events fit together, what its shape was. If I were to write a story arc about 13 and a half, it would look like this. And this is in your slides also. It starts with the narrator goes to Ashley's big fancy house. And then Ashley gives the narrator a tour and makes up a lot of rules. The narrator feels uncomfortable. Ashley talks a lot about getting older and also her exotic bird. At the peak of the events, Ashley and the narrator find the bird dead. The mother explains that the bird is not what Ashley thought it was. The narrator wants to leave, but she stays, and Ashley and the narrator hold a funeral. The narrator at the end is kinder and more appreciative of her life. When the author of this story wrote this, she probably knew that it would be about two kids having a bad play date. But she probably didn't know when she started, when she started to write the story, exactly what would happen on every single page. But she imagined one way the story might go, and another, and another. Authors always know that the trouble will grow and the characters will make choices, some of which probably won't work out. The author also knows that somehow, in the midst of the trouble, somehow there will be something that makes a difference. What you will need to do today is start plotting out your storyline. Here is another example of what a plotted out storyline might look like. And this is a story arc that is more equal. Your story arcs might look a little bit different in that all of the great events might happen towards the end, and the arc might look more like a ramp up, and then the big sequence of events happens at the end and a small fall off. So in this story arc, a writer wrote, at the beginning of the story, Jimmy wants to play with his other friends for once instead of with his best friend, Carter. Carter gets angry and throws a tantrum furiously. No one knows why. Carter teams up with Jimmy's enemy, Adrian, and tries to hurt Jimmy's feelings. Jimmy comes up with an idea with his uncle, and he tries not to get Carter and Adrian in trouble at the same time. The uncle is a therapist. At the end, Adrian is no longer with Carter and joins Jimmy, but Carter doesn't. So here's an example of a storyline that somebody started with, and then they went back to review and said, is this really the best storyline? They moved on and found some holes in their storyline and came up with a different plot line. And this plot line is more like a flow map, which you guys are familiar with. We did these a lot in A Christmas Carol. So he went with, here's the main thing that happens, and then some side notes. And then here's another main thing that happens with side notes, another and another. So this writer learned that his first idea didn't work out so well, so he plotted a second time, and that's where he was able to make his writing of the paper easier by having a very strong story. I'd like to show an example of of what a plot line should not look like, which is in this example. So they have three notes. The first one is, I was getting some shots up before the game, and then my notice that I was not making shots. Not a whole lot of detail, and it doesn't really make sense to me as a reader. In the second plot line, they were talking to each other, and she said, I saw you missing a lot of shots. And then the last is, we finally arrived at the game and kept saying the same words in my head over and over again. There isn't a clear problem or a clear solution in this plot line. What I'm looking for today, writers, is to, in your writer's notebook, create a plot line of events for your story. They should be sentences about what is happening. For example, in my story about the teacher who is living in another country, I'm going to start with my main conflict, my main problem, which is here, and that is that the teacher has gotten, I don't know what my main conflict is going to be. What's my main problem? How about my teacher, her grandma is sick at home. This is something familiar. So grandma gets sick. And from my earlier work, I know that my character is not really big on family. So I'm going to start my story by talking about my character's relationship with their family. So maybe a phone call is how I'm going to start my story, a phone call to mom, and then talk with Ricky about family. And side note would be, Ricky is very close to his family and gives advice. I'd like you to follow these steps, go through the entire plot line and show me at the end of class. And if you have any questions, just raise your hand. You'll have an exit ticket online as well. Have a great day. Good luck.